Ruslan.
What I appreciate about you, brother, is that like you're firm in these convictions, these positions that you have, but there also seems to be a humility where you don't think everybody that's not reformed is a heretic. You know what I'm saying? Like you know, I don't rock with the tulip all the way,
right.
and I tell you that, and you're not gonna be like, oh, brother, I don't know, man. You gotta watch your doctrine, man, because you know, right. So I appreciate it. I appreciate that about you, and
you know why though? Because Reformed theology is not the gospel though.
Come on.
People didn't have to believe in total depravity, unconditional election, limited. They just had to believe that what does Romans 10:9 say? If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and that he rose from the dead, you will be saved.
Amen.
Reformed theology is not the gospel. Amen. It is a conceptual framework to help me understand the theological way that things like salvation, the fall of man, these things happen. It is not the gospel. You don't have to believe Reformed theology. The thief on the cross was not like, think about what he said to Jesus. Hey, you didn't do anything wrong. You don't deserve this. And remember me when you come into your kingdom. He was the most atheological person in the scripture.
Yeah,
and Jesus said to me, today you'll be with me in paradise.
He's in. Yeah, he's
like,
in.
I think people, this is why Calvinists be tripping. Like we act like, that's why I know because I don't call myself a Calvinist. But it's like, fam, if you really are a Calvinist, right? And you really believe in Calvinism, then you should be the most humblest person because you know God chose you. What are you boasting for and arrogantly judging people for? God chose you if you believe your own theology. So a lot of Calvinists, to me, don't even believe their own theology. Because if you can be arrogant and you're a Calvinist, then I question your Calvinism and maybe your Christianity.
Whew.
You shouldn't be arrogant.
You said it. I didn't say it. You said it. Okay. My last gripe about Calvinism. My last gripe about Calvinism. I promise you, because people kept pressing me about having, someone that's reformed on here and an accurate representation. I'm like, man, I don't know who better than Curt Kennedy. Let me, So anyway, so this, and again, maybe I'm not connecting the dots properly, right? So you help me process this. Our church has been everything. The church that I'm currently at, I've been at the same church for like 18, 19 years, right? So we started out like, church plant, emergent, we're trying to like be cool and hip, and then it went like kind of more charismatic, and then it like swayed hardcore on the tulip. I mean, dude, one of our pastors who then went on and planted his own church. I mean, we kind of had a church split because of this, right? Wow. He went on to plant his own church from our church. At one point, basically rewrote like Driscoll's doctrines in theology, and we took like a 12-week course and had to sign like a covenant to rejoin. And I went through all that, right? And I was like, all right, cool, like I'm in. But I had this conversation with me and it broke my heart. And this is not an indictment on him as a person, in case he's watching this, because I love the brother dearly. But we had this conversation, and it was around the time, Curt, I come from poverty. Like my mother's a single parent home, mother's an alcoholic, dad wasn't in the picture. We come out here as refugees. English is my second language. A lot of baggage, a lot of trauma, a lot of just being dumb. And around the year 2010, 2011, I started discovering financial literacy. And I sat down with our reformed pastor and I said, man, I'm going through this stuff. It's amazing. We're paying off all this debt. This is great. Like, I think we should take the church through this FPU program, this Financial Peace University. Not an endorsement of everything Dave Ramsey's ever said and done. Miss me with that. But I'm like, I think this stuff is good. I think it could be valuable. And I think there needs to be some practical utility for people who are followers of Jesus so that we could take responsibility, make better decisions with our finances onto the glory of God. And he was like, I just don't think we need any more courses. And I was like, what do you mean? Like the gospel is amazing. I mean, I'm with you on the theology. Like I was there. I was probably 4.5 point, right? And he said, I just think people need to preach the gospel to themselves. And I was like, the gospel ain't gonna tell you how to manage a checkbook. Like the gospel is not gonna tell you how to work more hours and spend less money, right? You need some kind of tactical things to walk through. And we had walked through and we were on the other side of this. And he just kind of blew it off and to me over spiritualized it. And what happened was he then left, planted his own church. And he didn't say this in like an arrogant way. He said this very, very humbly. He planted his own church. We then ended up taking hundreds of people through the course, collectively paid off over $1 million worth of debt as a church, right? And then like saved like $500,000 in people's emergency funds and 6 months emergency funds, right? So this like helped change the trajectory of like those people, that many of which I'm still in contact and in community with. It was radical, the sanctification of that. Like if we're talking about sanctification, God needs access to our wallet. God needs access to my mental health. God needs access to these other aspects of me, right? And yes, the gospel is sufficient for salvation, and yes, I'm there. But the gospel also kind of forces me to act and live in a sanctified manner, right? On this side of eternity, with the time, talent, and treasure that he's given me, being born in a communist nation and being in America, like, oh my gosh, the opportunity, but not understanding that wealth begets wealth and money's, so again, maybe this is Calvinist or Reformed culture and not an indictment on the theology. But if there's a theology of like, this is your lot in life, God determines people to be wealthy or poor, God determines some people to be masters or slaves, right? Is there a connection there to this like almost like, well, it just is what it is, man. God just kind of, this is how it is. And so why try to change your socioeconomic status? Or why, because it's God's ultimately determined everything, right? And again, forgive me if I'm butchering, Reformed theology. Maybe I am, and I'm also removed from like really immersing myself in it like that. So what's your response to that? Because I don't know, because it's not everyone, but it was him, and it was where our church was at the time. And so how do you help me process that?
Yeah, so I think you've heard this phrase when it comes to like ethnicities, like black people, we're not monolithic, or we're not monolithic, right? So sure. Calvinists aren't monolithic. You're going to have different people who emphasize different things. You're going to have different people who come from different angles and have different things that they emphasize. And that's really a deeper issue about really what 1 Corinthians 12 is. Like what part, we're different parts of the body, so we're not going to all have the same things. Yeah. The thing about that kind of stuff is the reason why I would push back, I would more side with you. Okay. And the reason why is because, okay, there's a difference between God's sovereign and I know the future that God has prepared. There's a difference. So just because I may be poor now doesn't mean that that's what God has. I'm supposed to just stay that way, right? Like I get that in 1 Corinthians 7, it does highlight however you've come to know the Lord, stay in that place, right? Yeah. But we got to look at the overall context of that statement to really do that. I don't know. So you could say the same. People use the same argument with evangelism. Well, what's the point of preaching the gospel then if God's the one who saves them? Right. Now, this is for me personally, right? Election and God's sovereignty in choosing people promotes evangelism to me because now I know someone's going to believe, right? Like, you look at Acts 18, right? Paul was afraid to go to Corinth. The great mighty Paul was afraid, bro. And so God appears to him in a vision and says, look, no one's going to harm you. Go preach the gospel. I have people in that city. He wasn't saying there's Christians there. He was saying they're going to be people who respond to your message that I have chosen to believe. Yeah. So, and that gave Paul confidence to go to Corinth. That's Acts 18, right? So we don't know, just because I am this now, I don't know what God has planned out, right? I don't know. So my job, this is Romans 12, do not be conformed to the image of the world, but be transformed by testing, you may discern what is the will of God. Like, I don't know what the will of God is. For me, when I hear you talk about what you're doing, I think Galatians 6:10, as we have opportunity, do good to everyone, especially those in the household of faith. So how is that not an application of doing good to believers? And I think sometimes we get so theological that we forget that like this thing has to be lived practical. I got to live like a human being around people who
Yes.
are not theological, who are not
Yes.
thinking This is why Paul in Acts 17, he was philosophical in his gospel. And then in Acts 26, in front of Felix, King Felix, he shares his testimony.
Come
It
on.
wasn't all, in Genesis, this, and it wasn't all theological.
Yeah,
They were
yeah,
like,
yeah.
no, let me use what I got to
Come on.
get the message out. And I think sometimes Calvinists or Calvinistic culture, Reformed culture, has this real sort of dogmatic way that this has to be done to please God. And it's like, fam, you don't know that. So I think these things that can help people be better stewards and really not have the financial burdens, which we know the enemy uses that significantly to cause divorces and for people to really sin.
Yep.
Like that, to me, that's a skill set to me that I think that's biblical equity in what I call, people think equity is like equal outcome and they push back against that. Biblical equity is equal have some, right? That's what Acts 2 was. Everyone gave what do you need? You need 2 cloaks and a belt? Okay, give them 2 cloaks and a belt. What do you need? Shoes and food for a week?
Yeah.
It wasn't everyone has the same thing. It was everyone has something.
Yes.
And so I think we need to bring our gifts, man, and our talents. And that's, and say, hey, if you can do that, man, do it at my church. Hey,
Amen.
let me know,
Amen.
brother. We'll fly you in. Like,
Yeah.
let's get it. Like, let's do that because we can do more for the kingdom. So I don't understand Reformed people who think like we need to push back on these things. I just don't get it.
Kingstream Entertainment. Ruslan.
When the culture says do what you love, we respond with love what you do. You may have responsibilities that you aren't passionate about, but loving what you do means being faithful to what's in front of you, committing to excellence as if that were your greatest dream. Colossians 3:23 says, work diligently at whatever you do, as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people.
Love what you do. Love what you do.
Kingstream Entertainment. Ruslan.
Yo, thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. If you found it valuable, considering giving it a like and subscribing. This month, I'm releasing the Love What You Do collection. And to celebrate, I'm doing a 3-day virtual event to help us go from learning to love what we do to ultimately doing what we love. By the way, it's free, so hit the link in the description to grab your seat today.